Item number 11, Successor Agency. Receive a report and adopt a resolution as the successor agency to the San Bruno Redevelopment Agency approving the draft third recognized obligation payment schedule for the period January 1 to June 30, 2013. Kim.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor and members of the Successor Agency Board. So on June 27, 2012, the state legislature passed and the governor signed Assembly Bill 1484, which is the Redevelopment Dissolution Unwind Trailer Bill. This trailer bill was intended to make amendments to the Redevelopment Dissolution Act, Assembly Bill 26, and is really meant to make amendments based on some of the difficulty and experience that agencies had in implementing the provisions, the many provisions of AB 26. There are many aspects of AB 1484 that will impact San Bruno, so I'm going to just quickly walk through what those impacts will be. First of all, as you're aware, AB 26 requires that a successor agency prepare a recognized obligation payment schedule every 6 months to ensure that we continue to receive funds to pay the outstanding enforceable obligations of the former redevelopment agency. AB 1484 determines that the third ROPS for the period of January 1st through June 30, 2013 must be prepared and approved by the Oversight Board and submitted to the State Department of Finance and the County Auditor Controller by September 1st, 2012. If the city or if the successor agency fails to comply with that deadline, the city is subject to a fine of $10,000 per day. So there are consequences now. Prior to the trailer bill, there were no real consequences in AB 26 if you didn't approve the ROPS. So this obviously has pretty significant consequences. In addition, the Department of Finance has released a new form of the ROPS. So the ROPS that was sent to you, as before you tonight, contains many additional pages of information that were not in the previous versions. So the version that's before you tonight is still a draft. It's pretty much getting close to final draft, but given all the pages and all the amount of information that we're putting in there, we're continuing to work on it. And we are anticipating that that will be sent to the Oversight Board and for approval at their meeting next Tuesday on the 21st. Another provision of the trailer bill that will impact San Bruno is the requirement of the successor agency to engage in yet another audit process. We've already gone through a 3-stage audit process back in the spring, and AB 1484 outlines another 2-stage audit process. So we will engage in the first step of that process, which they will come in and basically determine the remaining funds in the low and moderate income housing fund by October 1st, and that audit has to then go to the Oversight Board for approval by October 15th. And then subsequent to that first audit, we'll have a second phase to audit the rest of the former redevelopment agency funds, which has to be done by December 15th, with approval by the Oversight Board by January 15th. These audits are significant because once they're complete, the Department of Finance will review them and issue what is called a finding of completion. So AB 1484 is essentially put on hold sort of many of the aspects of the dissolution bill that we were going through. So for instance, the next step would be the property disposition. AB 26 basically outlined a process in which all properties owned by the former redevelopment agency were to be disposed of as expeditiously as possible. AB 1484, the trailer bill, has essentially put a hold on that activity until a finding of completion is issued. So at this point in time, no agencies will be disposing of property over the next 6 to 8 months while we go through these audit process. So as I mentioned, once that finding of completion is issued, the successor agency will submit what is called a long-term property management plan. That property management plan will basically outline the intended use of any properties owned by the former redevelopment agency. So in our case, the only property that has been determined to have been owned by the redevelopment agency is the Pocket Park located at 470 San Mateo Avenue. So the long-term property management plan essentially there's 4 permitted uses under that plan. The first is the continuing retention of the property by a government agency for its continued use as a park in this case. You can retain property for future development if that's what the redevelopment plan called for. You can use the property to fulfill an enforceable obligation, or the oversight board or the successor agency can determine that sale of the property is in the best interest. Finally, and probably most important, one of the most important things as it relates to San Bruno is the provision added in the trailer bill for repayment of outstanding advances between redevelopment agencies and cities. As you're well aware, AB 26, the original dissolution bill, essentially said that any advances or loans made by a city to the redevelopment agency outside the initial 2 years of the agency formation were not enforceable obligations and basically had no provision for those to be repaid. So the trailer bill does provide a means for repayment of outstanding city advances to redevelopment agencies, regardless of whether or not it was within the 2 years of agency formation. Essentially just requires that the oversight board find that the loan was made for legitimate redevelopment purposes. However, there's a formula prescribed in the statute. So in simple terms as possible, there's sort of a pecking order on how agencies are paid. All the former tax increment funds are distributed to pay enforceable obligations and pass-through payments and so on. And then what's left over is distributed to taxing entities as property tax revenue. So if in this year, say $2 million is distributed as property tax revenue to the taxing entities, in order for the city to begin getting repaid any part of the outstanding $2.9 million in advances, that base distribution has to increase. So basically it's saying that taxing entities are assured that $2 million will continue to be distributed going forward. So in order for the loan to be repaid, that base has to grow. So come next year, that base would have to grow from $2 million to say $2.4 million. And then that $400,000 of growth would then, there's a formula that says 50% of that could be repaid in the form of a loan. So the city would be eligible to receive a repayment of $200,000 of that outstanding loan. Further, it also adds a provision that says 20% of any outstanding loan repayments are to go towards low and moderate income housing purposes. So even though the city now has a means of getting repaid the $2.9 million, it won't receive the entire $2.9 as unrestricted revenues, essentially. So that's pretty much a summary of where things stand with the trailer bill and redevelopment or successor agency items as they currently exist. So happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? I'd just like to say I wish we could supply a nice big trailer, maybe with no air conditioning, for the legislature to sit in for a while and see what a mess they've made of this whole thing. I don't know how you keep it in your head, Kim. Did a great job. Anyway, any questions or action?
I'll introduce the resolution.
Board Member O'Connell.
Aye.
Board Member Medina.
Aye.
Board Member Salazar.
Aye.
Vice Chair Ibarra.
Aye.
Chair Ruane.
Aye.